and welcome aboard the Giddy Carousel of Pop, a podcast all about top pop mag smash hits. And what we do is take an old issue, usually from the 80s, although we may slide a year or two either side of that, and have a good poke around its pages with a guest. I'm Simon Galloway, and joining me, as always, he's the peaches to my herb. We're reunited, and it feels so good. It's Mr. Gavin Hogg.
Oh, Si, of all the introductions you've given me, I think that was the loveliest yet. Thank you.
It was better than calling you a ruddy big pig, but you know.
Yeah, fair do.
And I believe you've got a few hellos and shout-outs for the pop kids out there.
I have, yeah. The Carousel Massive were swinging into action the other night. I put a little tweet out just seeing if anyone wanted a little hello on today's show, and got responses from quite a few people. So thank you for being our friends and Twitter followers to previous guest, Kath Sked, Circuit 3, JJ Vinyl Record Shop, Pop Rambler, Pete Brasted, Rob Pryor, Rachel Galloway, Free with this month's issue, Mr. Beaner himself, John Dredge, Louise Gardner, who lives in Sydney in Australia.
Ooh.
That's good, isn't it? We've got listeners in Sydney. And Debbie Pritchard from the Gold Coast. Also John Mulligan, Andy AVAV Systems, Rob Freeman, Freddie Valentine, Luke Reeder, Richard Drew, and last but by no means least, Jonathan Wilkins. Thank you very much, people.
Yeah, and also a big hello to all our new followers out there. Good to have you on board the carousel. And a big thank you to those pop kids who've supported the podcast and bought us a coffee. You too can do the same. It's very simple and there's no long-term commitment. It can be a one-off thing, or you can buy as many coffees as you like, as often as you like. It's up to you. Here's how you do it. Just go to coffee.com/giddypoppod. That's ko-fi.com/giddypoppod, and chuck us a few quid to help keep the carousel spinning. And I think it's about time we welcomed our guest onto the carousel. He served as editor of Q, Select and Mixmag, was part of the esteemed and, you have to say, greatly missed magazine, The Word, and has written for many other publications along the way. These days, he's a prolific podcaster, including Remainiacs, The Bunker, and pop culture podcast Bigmouth, which is a big fave around these parts. Waiting patiently for his ride on the carousel is Andrew Harrison. Welcome along.
Hello, chaps. Thank you for welcoming me aboard. Do I have to be this tall to ride the carousel? Because I'm not.
You've just sneaked on there.
So we're going back 40 years to the smash hits of the 29th of May to the 11th of June 1980. Mm-hmm. Terry Hall from The Specials is leaning out of the cover, trademark sullen stare and deadpan face, all present and correct. And this issue would have cost you the princely sum of 30p back in the day. As ever, if you want to read along with us, you can do just that, thanks to a couple of amazing websites, Brian McCloskey's Like Punk Never Happened and Smash Hits Remembered. You'll find links to the scans of this issue in the show notes, along with Spotify and YouTube playlists that include pretty much all the songs and artists featured in this issue of The Hits. And you'll also find these links on our website, giddypoppod.home.blog, and over on our Twitter and Facebook feeds. Just search for the Giddy Carousel of Pop or at GiddyPopPod. Now, before we get stuck in, Andrew, am I right in thinking that you've been involved in smash hits at some point during your illustrious career?
I have had minor involvement at minor moments. I'm very much a bit part player, nothing enormous. I was in the sad diminuendo of the Hits' life in the 2000s. I was in an hilarious, inappropriate moment, possibly even an administrative error, supposedly in charge of Smash Hits. I was supposedly the editor's boss for about 5 minutes. I don't know whether this has been mentioned much on the podcast, but the end days of Smash Hits were not glorious, and they were not well managed by the suits, by the people upstairs. And I found myself off cue and on Smash Hits somehow. It was very strange. It was the days when the kind of initiative of pop had been completely wrested away by the X Factor. Simon Cowell's worldview ran everything, and the poor old Hits couldn't really catch up. When I was there, it was kind of improving because there was a very talented young bunch, and I often think that if they had been born 10 years earlier, they would have been a fantastic team on the Hits in its days of glory. So they were making a good fist of it. They were doing as well as they possibly could. But unfortunately, it had been edited by, do you remember Emma Jones, who had a column in The Sun?
Yes.
She inexplicably was made editor of Smash Hits and just laid it waste, just turned it into a sad travesty. and it was hard. It proved impossible to get it back. Even though they did their utmost, and a lot of very good people worked on it, and I sort of think they kind of got swizzed. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like, your dream job, but your circumstances have just moved away from it. So I was there at the end, but also I did write one thing for Smash Hits in its days of glory, which was I reviewed Frankie Goes to Hollywood at the G-Mex. Frankie Goes to Hollywood were on at the G-Mex with Berlin, hair of Take My Breath Away fame, Songstrel. And this was when I was a student. I was a student in Leeds, and I really wanted to, I'd written about pop already before I became a student. I used to write live reviews of the Liverpool Echo, which I would phone in from a phone box, stuffing 2 P's into the phone box to dictate my reviews of the Jesus and Mary Chain and Echo and the Bunnymen and Level 42, of all people, to the copy takers of the Echo, who were fantastically disdainful of pop music. Really, what is this? But I supplemented my income by writing a bit about pop music now and again. And while I was a student, I saw that I just basically wanted to get to see Frank Goes to Hollywood at the G-Mex, who then were on their difficult second album, Liverpool. And I just thought, I'll ring up the hits and see if I can get hold of anybody and try and persuade them to let me review this thing. So I rang up and I got straight through to Barry McElhenney, to my amazement and horror. I'm like, hello, I'm in Leeds, I'm a student in Leeds, I want to review. So Barry goes, and I'm not going to try and do the voice because you've had him on the podcast and I wouldn't insult Barry by trying to do the voice, just said, yeah, okay, do it. And I'm like, what? He said, just do it. Ring up this person, here's Island Records press office. And I was, basically I was the Acid House Adrian Mole at this point, and had absolutely no clue about anything. So I just rang up and said, oh, I want to come and see Frank Goes to Hollywood, to the G-Max Smash Hits, want me to do it? I ended up going in review. And like an idiot, I didn't ask, how many words do you want? And of course, a long Smash Hits review in those days was about 300 words. I filed 1,500 words of my attempt to do Smash Hits. And this, of course, is when they were remaking the English language with, Swingo Rilliant, Jumbo Rilliant, Spew Gusting, Crimson Perv Breeks, all your favourites, and everything in inverted commas. So I did up 1,500 words of this, and to their credit, they hacked it down to 400, stuck it in, and seemed to be perfectly happy. I failed to follow up on getting my foot through the door at this point, but it was nice to actually have a byline in Smash Hits, when it was actually properly Smash Hits. I also did write a little bit for the Smash Hits yearbook, thanks to Ian Jockey Cranner, who's the editor of the issue of Smash Hits that we are about to review. And I owe Ian Jockey Cranner an awful lot because he basically got me on the Giddy Carousel. So I wrote a couple of things for them as well.
So before we get stuck into this edition of the hits, and before we clamber aboard the Carousel, let's set the scene. So you've already touched upon what you were doing in the mid to late 80s there. But what about in 1980? So the May and June of 1980. Do you remember what you were up to back then, how old you were and where you were living?
I was 13, and actually I can tell you exactly what I was doing the week this edition came out. Because it's the 29th of May, 1980. I was at Pontins Prestatyn because it was Whit Week.
Yeah.
And we went every Whit Week. Pontins Prestatyn, immortalised in Holiday on the Buses, the movie. So you could see it as was, with the cast of On the Buses messing around the boating lake and in the very swimming pool in which I spent many a happy hour in the 1970s, early 1980s. And I vividly remember Rat Race by the Specials, which this edition is promoting, being played in the disco. And the disco in Pontins Prestatyn was actually the luggage room where people would have their luggage dumped off the coach before they went to their chalets. And after the Saturday, when everybody claimed all their suitcases, it was turned into the disco. What this meant was some black light bulbs, and that was it. So some black light tubes and a guy with decks at the other end. And me, being 13 and a pop music fan and looking about 9, found it phenomenally intimidating, but also absolutely kind of entrancing. I desperately wanted to be in there dancing to the music and being part of it. And I remember in previous years, my mum would go in with me. But I think I'd graduated to going in on my own by the time I was 30, because I was a teenager, you see. And I vividly remember Rat Race by the Specials being played in the disco of Pontins Prestatyn. So, yeah, I mean, I was 13. I was living in just outside Maghull on Merseyside, halfway between Maghull and Ormskirk, out in the fields, with 2 younger brothers, one of whom, Ian, is now the news editor of Mojo magazine, and the other brother Stuart is a cartoonist and an illustrator. And that was it. I mean, we used to work Saturdays in my dad's butcher's shop, which is the reason that A, I had a little tiny bit of money, but B, it's the reason I never saw Liverpool playing on Saturdays, because I was in the backyard a couple of hundred yards away from Anfield, scrubbing blood off old boards and cleaning a dirty backyard, while over the back wall I could hear Liverpool destroying everyone on their march to their umpteenth title. So that's what I was doing when I was 13.
So with that hard-earned cash, I'm presuming that you were going out and buying records.
Yeah.
What sort of stuff?
Two-tone.
Two-tone all the way, was it?
Two-tone all the way. It was two-tone. Two-tone got me at an impressionable age. Two-tone was the first thing that was my thing, because previously, I'd loved Slade and the Sweet, and still love Slade and the Sweet. I'd loved, around about sort of 1978, 1979, it sort of clicked in my head that pop music was more than just a thing I had lying around. It was going to be an important thing in my life. In fact, I remember going to secondary school in 1978 and thinking, I can't play football, I can't fight, I need a thing. Pop music's going to be my thing. I can know about pop music, I know a lot about pop music, and it will become the currency of my school life, but also my life. So that's how it happened. But before Two-Tone, it had been the Amazing Dot, who I loved, because, and at a distance now, 40 years later, I can see, because it's all music for dancing to. It's all music for, it's not heavily freighted with meaning, although obviously the Specials and Two-Tone had a lot of meaning. They had a lot of things to say, but ultimately it was music for dancing to. It was music for going mad to, and that was what I loved about Two-Tone. You could see the dance on Top of the Pops on a Thursday night, and in the school disco on a Friday lunchtime, you could be doing the dance. Also, you could very easily customise a school uniform to make yourself look like Walt Jabsko, the Two-Tone Man. All you needed was a pair of white socks, put the fat end of your tie inside your shirt, make sure your shirt had a small collar, you're away. And I remember being asked, after I'd started doing this, one of our teachers said, what are you doing? Why are you doing this, Andrew? Because it wasn't in conventional school uniform. It's just a bit odd. Why are you doing this? And I said, because I'm a rude boy, miss. And she said, oh, no, you're not, Andrew. You're very polite. And, but, all that lot and a surreptitious 1-inch badge, and you were away. So yeah, it was Two-Tone. It was the Specials. Fantastic. I remember seeing Madness on Top of the Pops at the end of 1979 doing the Prince, their debut, and thinking, this is rubbish, this is terrible, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It sounds like fairground music, they can't play their instruments. And a week later they were my favourite band, and I never looked back. And they still are one of my favourite bands. And that made me think that the things that puzzle you and surprise you, and that you don't like, are often going to turn out to be your favourite things. I can remember coming home from we were on holiday in first week in September 1979, coming home listening to the top 40 on a little tiny radio, because having been in France or whatever for a fortnight, you're out of touch with pop music, which is terrible. It was like going blind or deaf or something. You did not know what was going on. And listening to the top 40 was like in at number 19 or whatever, it's the Specials with Gangsters. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. Powerful impression, and there we were, off, convinced forever.
So bringing our attention to Smash Hits itself, and was it something that was on your radar at the time? Was it something that you were reading? Actually,
it wasn't that much. I picked it up now and again. This period, this 1980, this is kind of before Smash Hits becomes Smash Hits, isn't it? This is the period of Smash Hits. This is the original generation, the kind of before the language goes mad, before the sense of humour really embeds. And I remember enjoying it. I spent all my money on comics, to be honest with you. It was Mighty World of Marvel and Spider-Man Comics Weekly and so on. So I would read other people's Smash Hits, and the importance and the currency of having the lyrics was enormously important. And I actually used to earn a little bit of spare cash transcribing lyrics for people who were too tight to buy Smash Hits for themselves. So for 10p, I would do you the lyrics of probably Midnight Dynamo by Matchbox, or The Devil Went Down to Georgia, or whatever happened to be out at the time. So always on the hustle. But no, I did enjoy Smash Hits and found it fascinating. And now, 40 years later, with my magazine head on, the thing that surprised me, and particularly the cover, is how spare and sparse and unfussy and unsalesman-like it is. There aren't any screaming, grab, you must read this cover lines. The cover lines are literally the names of the bands, the Specials, Orchestral Manoeuvres, Hot Chocolate, New Music, Dexy's Midnight Runners in colour. There's no you must read this. There's none of those devices that were first very effective and then got really tiresome, like 22 Days Inside the Heart, the beating heart of the U2 machine, or, sex, banjos, bison, inside the mad world of insert pop star's name. None of this had been invented yet. And actually the journey from smash hits to that it was all being made in public, wasn't it? Because smash hits begets Q, begets Mojo, and Select comes in parallel, and we're all in this kind of gigantic sort of, it's like forced rhubarb, we're all kind of being forced under the lights to just do it better and louder and more grabby and more yellow and a free in the corner, and this edition of smash hits, which is just Terry looming at you, it almost looks like an edition of The Gentlewoman or an edition of Fantastic Man or something. It's so austere. Terry looks incredible. Obviously, he's wearing a blood red suit with a blood red shirt with blood red eyeshadow and apparently blood red dyed hair. And he looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. And it's incredible. Just like totally compelling.
Well, I think it's interesting to look at the other covers from this time as well. And it very much is the thing of just a headshot. It's one person and quite often very close in. And it carries on like that for a good couple of years using that kind of style.
It does, yeah. Well, I think the genius that Nick Logan hit upon was that in this moment, pop music had been so taken away from the fans because the weeklies had become so, almost disdainful of what pop was. This is, I didn't start reading the NME until 1981. I bought my first copy of the NME because I wanted to find out why the Specials had split up. There was no other way of finding out. I had to wait a week to find out why the Specials had split up. But now, with a bit of remove, I can see that Smash Hits was removing the barrier between you and the bands that you loved. And you see it in all the stories that we're going to talk about in a minute. It's like, it's not about some, weekly inky writer giving you their immensely complicated theoretical take on these people. It's not about, trying to impose an idea on them. It's like, how did you start your band? Why did you start your band? Where did you live? What did your mum and dad do? And weirdly, those are all the things that I got into myself. This is why I loved Q when it came out, because it actually told you the stories of the bands. I mean, I remember, being increasingly dissatisfied with the NME because, sitting there asking Mark Unpronounceable Surname out of Big Country, what does he think about socialism and Thatcher, and asking, Winston Bazoomius from Bad Manners about Kierkegaard. It's not necessarily what you as a pop fan want. What you want is the tale of how they came to be and why they do what they do. And obviously it can oscillate a bit too far in the other direction. And, 40 years of Pop Jones, we've seen the metronome swing back and forth. But I've always thought, and I can remember thinking dimly, at the time, when I would borrow people's issues of smash hits, yeah, they actually tell you who they are. You learn a lot from it.
Now, that's a good point about the writers, because really the style that these are written in, it's not at all important who's writing the piece. You don't get any sense of their personality coming across, really, do you? It's because the focus is on the bands. And
at this stage, you don't. And I'm looking at the contents page now. I'm looking at the masthead now. Editor Ian Jockey Cranmer, to whom I owe a lot. Features editor David Hepworth, to whom I owe a lot. I mean, in the middle of being when I was a student, I got so depressed and bored and thought this was awful. I actually applied for a job at EMAP and got an interview with David Hepworth. Came down to London, got an interview with David Hepworth, and I was sitting there full of my love of pop music, and he goes, "All right, what ideas have you got for smash hits?" And I just blanked because I didn't think you were supposed to have ideas. Must have been 1986 or 87, something like that. I just thought he'd go, "Well, you seem like a likely young lad. Here's 2 first-class tickets to Los Angeles. Go and hang around with your favourite bands for a while, see what you get." No, give us some ideas. I just sat there like a lemon. And he said, I'm not going to take anybody who hasn't finished their university course. So go away, finish your university course, and then see what happens. So I did. So it was very good. So I owe him a lot. Look at the rest of the contributors. Fred Deller, Steve Taylor, advertising manager Rod Sopp, who I worked with at Wagadan, publishers The Face. Rod the Mod Sopp, a fantastic character, best mate of Nick Logan, managing editor Nick Logan, who obviously we need say no more about what he's done. But publisher Peter Strong, who also worked on, he was the MD of The Word when I was there. And Peter Strong's a fantastic chap. He looks like, if you can imagine, Roger Delgado's master had lived a lot longer and become a much more jolly fellow, a much more jolly and friendly and approachable fellow. Peter Strong was like he was a character from an Ealing comedy, actually, a truly dependable British gentleman. So they're all here. It's weird. It's like seeing people at, that you would have. There's a lot of dramatic irony on the go here. People I will encounter in the future. But yeah, the writing is not. It has yet to evolve the smash hits Argo, and we've yet to meet stars like Tom Hibbert, much less the later people like William Shaw and Chris Seath, who actually do develop their own style, and actually their own style then becomes smash hits house style. So it's more utilitarian, it's more sparse, and it's in a lot of ways more post-punk. It is writing in the style of utilitarianism and that kind of thing.
So let's have a look at what's actually in this issue of Smash It, shall we?
And what's the first thing we encounter? Lyrics. We encounter the lyrics to Rescued by the Bunny Men and No Self-Control by Peter Gabriel, because obviously that's the most, and We Are Glass by Gary Newman, because they're the most important things in the magazine. Echo and the Bunny Men, two of them went to our school. They went to Days High School in McGull. So that would be Will and Les, and they left before I started, so I never actually met them. But I do remember when they had their first hit, and I assumed that we'd go into school and the headmaster would, morning assembly, the headmaster would say, "Great news, everyone! 2 former pupils of this school are bona fide top 40 pop stars. They're in the pop chart. It is a great day. We should all celebrate." And he didn't say anything. He didn't say a single thing. And I thought, this is an outrage. This is like that. The unfair cruelty of the world. My illusions were shattered. But you would have expected that, wouldn't you? But of course, I now know that he had barely any conception of what pop music was, let alone Echo and the Bunnymen, and would have probably considered Les and Will to be a pair of delinquents. Although I did interview them many years later, and they did ask after 1 or 2 shared school teachers. So, there we go.
So you've already mentioned a few of the songs that are in this issue of hits. So we've also got Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark with Messages, the Bucket of Water song by the Four Bucketeers, the aforementioned Specials, Mystic Merlin, Just Can't Give You Up, Crown Heights Affair, You Gave Me Love, Jermaine Jackson, Let's Get Serious, Midnight Dynamos by Matchbox, Let's Go Round Again by the Average White Band, A Blast from the Past with This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us by Sparks, Pulling Muscles from a Shell by Squeeze, In the Kitchen at Parties by Jonah Louie, and I'm Alive by Electric Light Orchestra. And there are also features on, obviously, the Specials, what with Terry Hall being the cover star, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, and Hot Chocolate as well. And even though we've got a centre spread in colour of new music, and even though the cover on the front promises Dex's Midnight Runners,
they're not in there.
They're not in there. So I think it's the Human League. So I think a bit of a mix-up there.
And there may have been a last-minute decision to put the Human League in, because the twin pillars of smash hits in this era are song, words and posters, aren't they?
Yeah.
And there's a reason why the features are right at the bottom of the list of contents. It's like, it just says specials feature. The days when you would spend an inordinate amount of time crafting, your incredible, headline or contents line, they have not arrived yet. So and that was actually always, my favourite part of Smash Hits, and then my favourite part of doing the job, the headlines and the cover lines and the puns and the wordplay and all the rest of it. I saw a fantastic old issue of Smash Hits the other day, and it was Zig Zig Sputnik with a cover, and the cover line was, "Are they the future of rock and roll or a load of Codswallop?" Zig Zig Sputnik. And I thought, that's what I love about this business. A load of Codswallop.
Well, let's get stuck into our first feature then, shall we?
Yes.
Gavin, do you want to take the helm for this one?
Indeed. OMG, it's OMD. So with a large and lovely picture of the two lads in what appears to be an Eastern European train station with Winston the tape machine in the foreground and the lyrics to Messages, their current hit single, we get a page feature on OMD, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, the acceptable face of synthesizers. It's written by Steve Taylor, who seems to be the kind of the go-to man for Northwest bands. And they've already had their first album out at this point, and they're a few months away from their second album, and Messages is just starting to ride high in the singles chart. And it paints a bit of a picture of them in concert. So the piece starts out, it's a Friday night at a typical college gig somewhere near London's Elephant and Castle. The customary sweaty room is full of studious-looking types downing gassy beer and going through the ritual known as waiting for the band. Eventually, 4 rather neat young men take the stage. 2 station themselves behind nifty-looking metal frames which support various keyboards and Habitat-style reading lamps. The 3rd guy stands in the middle at the front, bass and microphone at the ready. The last lad sits down behind a drum kit which appears to have been attacked by thieves on the way to the gig. Hardly any drums left. These are Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, and they proceed to pump out an extremely tasty set of songs. Bouncy, dance-worthy bass and electronic percussion, hence the mini-kit, with strong vocal melodies and a lacing of economically used synthesizers. No guitar, but no doomy Teutonic dirges either. Just healthy 80s pop with an enjoyable input of technology. So it kind of sets a scene there, and then it sounds like Steve had already been to Liverpool and interviewed them earlier on. And as we were saying before, really, in this issue, we get a lot of stuff about the history of bands, and it goes through the last kind of 3 years of Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, them starting out involved in a band called the Id, and then kind of how they got together and their style of music. Andrew, growing up in that part of the world, I know they weren't exactly neighbours, but they were fairly close to where you grew up. Do you remember much about OMD in those days? Were they on your radar much?
No, I was a little bit young for them. They came to me through the medium, obviously Top of the Pops, and also through other people's haircuts and other people's clothes, because there's a lot of... there's a lot of thin tie action going on here. I think that picture that you described, I have a suspicion it might be Liverpool's Exchange Station, which was, I think had just been closed down or was about to be closed down. And they were from the Wirral. They were from Mells on the Wirral, over the water, which is like an alien world where you would seldom go. And also, I hadn't really understood. I was dimly aware of. I'd seen Kraftwerk on Tomorrow's World, and I think I'd seen them on Tomorrow's World. I think that had happened. Or maybe I'm getting it out of order, but I hadn't properly got my head around the idea of inhuman music, which is, of course, now my favourite thing. But they were bang into it, but of course, your main introduction to these artists would be through either Smash Hits or Top of the Pops, where you would get a feel for, you would get the look and the idea of how they wanted to present themselves at the exact same time as the music. The idea of, I hadn't discovered John Peel yet. I was barely aware that there was music that was made that didn't make it into the pop charts. And when I discovered that, I was shocked and astounded. And my first thought was, well, what's the point then? If you put a record out and it's not in the charts, why bother? And also being, from my background, well, how'd you make your money then if you don't get in the pop chart? But no, I mean, I remember really liking OMD when I heard what I heard of them, because they seemed so odd and but also it was so vivid. I was very fond of red frame white light, and the record sleeves were another key way that you apprehended this stuff. You'd be in record shops looking at music you didn't understand. I think I was at this point too frightened to go in Probe in Liverpool. I would go to Philip's son and nephew, the bookshop next door, instead and buy me Doctor Who paperbacks, but Probe was just too frightening to go into, and it took me years to actually go in there. But yeah, I mean, I just remember thinking, this is music I've never heard before at the age of 13, when I've heard barely anything anyway, and being kind of weirdly mesmerised by them. I couldn't say I was ever a fan. I don't think actually, I was at that stage where, if you buy one record, you feel you've got to buy them all. So I hadn't started collecting OMD. I didn't ever do that. But reading this feature is quite interesting, because people pop up. I mentioned a lot of dramatic irony. People pop up who in later life you will learn who they actually are. So Roger Eagle and Pete Fulwell, who ran Eric's, are mentioned here just in first name terms. There's some great, highly amusing bits in here, not least the typo in the intro. Just healthy 80s pop with an enjoyable input with an IM of technology. Dave Hepworth would go mad at that. He'd absolutely tear his hair out at that. Liverpool is described as the freezing but friendly port of Liverpool. And one of the closing lines is, for a band named after a song consisting of wall noises recorded from a TV mixed with the sound of several radios interfering with each other, OMD have come a long way.
Yeah.
Which is a fair appraisal, I think. They really have.
I think, we've talked before a bit about some of the language in this, and you're right, it's very hard. When I was reading that introduction, it's very hard not to read it in a Chumley Warner voice, because it does feel very kind of old-fashioned and sort of quite proper, like it's a bounceable bass and extremely tasty pop songs, and it's that kind of language being used.
But I think that was actually part of the reason that it what set it on its road to success was that it was intelligible. And when I started reading the NME the following year, when the special split up, on the one hand, it was great because it literally, in a Reader's Digest manner, expanded my word power. But it was also utterly baffling because the level, the knowledge of an arts postgraduate was assumed on behalf of a then 14-year-old former rude boy. And you got a fast and accelerated education, but it didn't, I could come out of those things not actually knowing how, for instance, the Gang of Four got together. It was just assumed that you would know, whereas Smash Hits was Wikipedia before it was Wikipedia. They gave just the facts, man. They filled you in good and proper. But again, more dramatic irony in this one. They're asked towards the end, OMD are asked, can they think of why they're having success when similar bands like the Human League are struggling? Not for long, readers. Not for long.
Hold your horses.
Yeah, absolutely. Narrator, but it wouldn't be that way for long. It's really interesting. But, I'm sort of also now at the age where literally anything old fascinates me. So the things in the corner of the photograph of OMD, Andy's wearing an absolutely shocking kind of mid-length PVC coat. Paul's looking a bit more upmarket, crossover of Scally and Man at C&A, but it's a really tragic coat choice for Andy, I'm afraid. But they've both got very good not looking at the camera skills, very strong looking glum not looking at the camera skills are in display here.
I'm not too sure about Andy's trousers either, looking almost flairish. They're possibly a little too long for him, and he's not had them turned up, so they're kind of bunching up at the bottom, but it's looking...
I think we might be seeing the end of the Kate Bush, Carl Douglas Kung Fu years. I think this just made that they look slightly dojo-ish. I think that might be the end of it. And is he wearing a cravat? History does not reveal whether he's wearing a cravat or not. But yeah, it is almost the prototypical Smash Hits feature. It explains what's going on, introduces you to the people, and you come away having learned quite a lot. We turn the page. Here's the lyrics for the Bucket of Water song. John Gorman, strong Liverpool connection. John Gorman, the mass poet of Tiswas, and Bob Carrollcheese.
For people who don't remember the Bucket of Water song, the Four Bucketeers were...
Simon, they all remember it. If they're listening to this podcast, they all remember it. Come on.
I didn't remember it, and I heard it a couple of months ago for something else that I was working on. I don't remember this. I wasn't a Tiswas kid. I was a swap shop kid, so there wasn't much of this going on in my life. I'm like, Tiswas made a record? So yeah, it's Chris Tarrant, Sally James, Bob Carrollcheese, and John Gorman with a happy sing-along song, Bucket of Water song.
Yeah. Words and music by John Gorman, reproduced by permission of PVA Music. By the way, Smash Hits lyrics, facts I discovered subsequently, it was £400 a go to reproduce the lyrics. So reproducing lyrics is quite expensive, I discovered. Whoa. Presumably this would have gone up as time's gone by, but at one point it was £400 to reproduce the lyrics. They reproduced the lyrics to Return of Lost Palmer 7 by Madness. The lyrics are waiter. £400. I suggest to you that the Madness are therefore the most highly paid authors in human history. £400 a word. Who gets that? Don DeLillo doesn't get that. I'm looking at who the actual writers are. I think it was Woody from Madness. Written by Mike Barson, Mark Bedford and Woody. So there you go. £400 split. Firstly, 50-50. Half of it goes to the whole band. The remaining 50% is split between the authors, as I've just learned from Madness's excellent book. Well, then we move on to Bits, which again has not turned into the madness of later years. It's actually very, very factual. We learned that The Clash are rearranging some concerts because it's caused inconvenience to the listeners. Thank you, The Clash. We learned that the police are releasing some old material, and a quick survey of opinion around the Smash Hits office suggests that most people reckon this is just a barefaced marketing manoeuvre unworthy of a band who have in the past given nothing less than value for money. Quite Partridgian, I'm sure you agree.
It's his accidental partridge.
Well, it was 6 singles in one pack that were all on blue vinyl, and you did get one record that hadn't been a single before, because I remember getting one of them as an ex-jukebox single back in 1980.
I remember when that came out. I remember hanging up at the record shop in the St John Centre in Liverpool, whose name escapes me, round the corner from Extreme, where the punks would buy their clothes. And it was hanging up there. It looked like this kind of ludicrously kind of extravagant thing. Six singles. Who could possibly afford such a thing? Now, here's something revealing. There's a picture of David Essex. Everybody's got something to hide department. David Essex pictured in 1969 at the height of his third comeback. Seems such an odd thing to put there for the primarily mid-teen audience. But David Essex, I suppose, was quite a big deal at the time. He's still hanging on to his 70s audience. But the thing that what gets me is, to my eye, he looks fantastic. He looks like, Bob Stanley from St. Etienne or Pete Wiggs. Incredible. Roll neck, loads of hair. Roll neck jumper, and this would have been considered utterly hilarious at the time, just stuck in the magazine, because he looks a bit different from what we look like now. And of course, if you turn up looking like David Essex does in this picture now, everybody think you look great. And if you turned up in Andy McCluskey's PVC Mac and Kung Fu pants, people would laugh you out of town. I mean, other amazing things in bits. A half page on new Liverpool label Zoo Records with the bands The Teardrop Explodes and Echo and the Bunny. Steve Taylor clearly getting his money's worth out of his trip to Liverpool here, because later in the mag we meet Wahheat as well.
Yeah, there's a strong Liverpool thread running all throughout this.
Yeah, but the thing that really amazed, I mean, there's a minor squabble between Ultravox and former singer John Fox. Will they ever be heard of ever again? The Musicians' Union is going to go on strike. It is not known what this will mean for Top of the Pops.
I'll tell you what it means for Top of the Pops.
Go on then.
Because I had a look. It took Top of the Pops off air from when this issue of Smash Hits came out, so at the end of May in 1980, until the 7th of August. It was off air for all that time.
Well, you see, this is why we needed Mrs. Thatcher. This is why we needed Mrs. Thatcher's firm hand. Short, sharp shot, you see, get Top of the Pops back on telly.
Yeah, get rid of those unions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Bring us back our pop music.
But my favourite story, this is how weird and unclassifiable Smash Hits was at the time. Bottom of the second page of bits. Billed as the cheapest novel of 1980, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle by Michael Moorcock comes in the shape of a giant popular newspaper available for 75p from Virgin Books. I had completely forgotten about this, as they were actually kicking the arse out of the last bits of the Sex Pistols. I'd totally forgotten Michael Moorcock had written a Great Rock and Roll Swindle thing. Also, they are putting out a new single, Stepping Stone, from the soundtrack, with a track called Pistols Propaganda, consisting of snatches of old songs linked by the voice of veteran BBC announcer John Snagg. So we really are at the arse end of punk here, aren't we? As we'll see later when we come to the clothes adverts.
Yeah.
We've got the Buggles have joined Yes.
Yeah.
Which, for my money, improved Yes enormously and gave us Owner of a Lonely Heart. But here we are, dramatic irony, a half-page item on the Ruts, which begins, a lot of things have gone wrong for the Ruts in recent months. Yes, and they're going to continue going wrong for the poor old Ruts. It really is quite sort of,
Yeah, because it was only a couple of months after that Malcolm Owen died.
Yes.
And it says here that they hadn't been able to do any gigs because he had throat problems, but they don't mention the heroin, so,
Yeah, well, heroin's bad for your throat. And that thing of kind of we talk about there's no barrier between you and the bands, but actually there was a barrier between you and the bands, and Smash Hits was quite good and would get better at it as time went by, talking about bands having to cancel tours because of a summer cold and things like that. Somebody's obviously strung out in the Priory or whatever,
protecting the kids. Yeah,
but poignant. Yeah,
I thought it was quite interesting in this piece they talk about, which we'll come on to in a minute in the specials thing as well, there's a mention of violence at gigs.
Yeah.
And they're talking about the nastiness of some of the shows, and it says the Ruts simply want to be honest, because they've had a lot of criticism for kind of people think that they've tried to kind of encourage violence. They've just had that the song Staring at the Rude Boys.
Yeah.
People like Andrew, or Polite Boys. And as bassist Seg says, the last thing we want to do is glorify violence. Perhaps the group shouldn't be knocked too hard for placing some trust in their audience's intelligence. But it's quite telling that features a couple of times in interviews with bands that, you wouldn't even occur to you now to, if you're in an interview with a band, there wouldn't be anything about violence at gigs really. But back then it was very much part of the culture, wasn't it?
Well, getting beaten up is part of growing up, as the late great Piranhas once sang. Gigs were terrifying, and as all your listeners will know, the first few I went to were at the Royal Court in Liverpool, and you really were, you had to really watch your back. And the fact that you were like 14 or 15 or whatever didn't make any difference whatsoever. You could still get your head kicked in. The first gig I went to at the Royal Court was The Beat, who were fantastic, but it was still a little bit hairy. And then the specials, where there was a fist fight, not just in the audience, but on stage as well. And they split up a couple of weeks later, just right after, must have been right after Ghost Town. But it was unnerving, and it was that sort of strange crossover of football hooliganism and violence at gigs. Because going to gigs was a weird thing in those days. Only weirdos did it. It wasn't part of the general entertainment menu as it is now, and has been since Oasis, really. So, Oasis put gig going kind of on the national palette. But before that, it was what you did if you didn't go to the match, or you were, obviously a lot of people went to the match as well as going to gigs, but it was definitely for the kind of left field people, and for the people who like to fight, because that was the hangover of punk.
Over the page, and we find our cover stars, the Specials, loitering around Lady Godiva's statue in Coventry city centre. The headline, Today Coventry, Tomorrow Coventry.
Interviewed by David Hepworth. And Terry Hall treats David Hepworth to a short course in 2 tonics and explains how to keep out of the rat race. Now, this is around rat race, which to this day, although it sounds fantastic, is still the special single that gets on my nerves the most. Because even then, I could see, as a kid, I've got one art O-level, it did nothing for me. Well, of course it's going to do nothing for you. It's one art O-level. This is what a very conventional Adrian Mole I was. So I was genuinely offended that the Specials should do a song about don't do your schoolwork. Don't work hard, it's pointless. I'm like, no, do your schoolwork. The Specials are supposed to be clever. They've got songs that are about things. But the featuring such great lines from Dave as the racy patter of Neville Staples. It is the facts, but delivered with a degree of panache and extremely readable, as Dave's stuff always has been. He gets straight to the point, and I was particularly fascinated when Terry starts talking about. We've been listening to a lot of things like John Barry albums. There's so many good theme tunes around that are just wasted. One of my favourite songs is the Third Man theme. It's just another idea. We're not going to go instrumental or anything, but Jerry's written a song called International Jet Set, which stems from our touring America and all the crap that we went through. He's just given that odd feel to it. It's spooky. First mention of International Jet Set, which to this day I can't sit on a plane that's taken off without hearing in the back of my head, do 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 do. And he's talking about what the Specials are going to do and how they're going to transform from the kind of ska punk rude boy oikery into the crazed, over-coloured, tartrazine, hi-fi music world of more Specials, which, again, first time I heard it, this is terrible. Second time I heard it, favourite album of all time. And that's what, I was starting to learn that this is what bands should do. They ought to stretch your brain. And the idea that the Specials could sell you on music that you would otherwise run away from like mad was kind of intriguing and strange. I mean, we do get the full rundown, the Coventry Automatics, who they've toured with, who's in the band, their lengthy string of hits from the Two-Tone stable, and how any gigantic record label would be proud of that. Those things are kind of that's Q. It's the ghost of Q. It's the future foreboding or foreshadowing rather, and it actually looks a lot like a Q feature. Big black and white picture, the big black and white headline, quite stark. The 2 magazines were more similar than you think, and I actually think I do remember reading this because I remember from whomever I borrowed it from. I remember thinking, "What? You're not going to do ska anymore? What's going on? I don't understand this." Well, it's the first mention of Socket Zoom JB because of John Bradbury's love of Northern Soul, the late and wonderful John Bradbury. So yeah, it kind of I'm sure you get an awful lot of Proust talk on this podcast as people go, "Oh my God, the years have fallen away," but the years kind of did fall away, and they're talking about, again, it's violence at gigs, talking about the thing that's followed them around and that they have to deal with. The Specials' determination to discourage violence in any form hasn't wavered at all. The Specials are one of the few bands who actually write songs that deal with this subject specifically, and not just as another arty generalisation. They see no glamour in it. Interesting. Nobody's asking Terry about Kierkegaard and Baudrillard and so on, as you might get elsewhere.
I think this issue and in the interviews throughout the magazine, there's a lot of facing forward and looking towards the future, isn't there? Because I guess they're just a few months into a new decade, and that whole kind of looking back at pop wasn't really a thing then, was it? You know, you were always moving forward. And so with OMD, they were talking about bringing kind of the human emotion into synths and electronic music. And with the Specials, they're clearly already at a bit of a crossroads and thinking they've kind of had enough of ska. Well, not had enough of ska, but they want to move on and they want to develop.
But also, it's interesting, the kind of, you know, the past was just the past. And it's elsewhere in this issue, we see very scant attention paid to Paul McCartney. Yeah. Who is, you know, he's just made another album, this clapped out old fella, and it's, you know, not very interesting. Paul McCartney full page ad in Smash Hits for his new album, McCartney 2, includes the single coming up. It's like the idea that Paul McCartney will be treated as just this kind of, you know, a sideshow of the past. Because yes, it was the 1980s. I vividly remember, I think this was in the NME. It was when Gary Newman had this was in the early days of reading the NME, so it must have been 1981 or 82, because that's when I started reading it. Gary Newman had very much fallen off the top of the tree. And so I can't remember who wrote it, and said, who needs robots in the pork pie hatted 1980s? You know, the future was going to be pork pie hats. We're all going to look like Alexei Sayle, and robots were just, computers are a fad. And how wrong can you be, you know? And you're saying people face the future an awful lot. And the reason that Smash Hits was so interested in the future was there was nowhere else to find out what was going to happen next. Nowhere. You were not going to find out from daytime Radio 1. If you were brave enough to venture into evening Radio 1, you'd be too busy being baffled and freaked out as a kid to understand, you know, the news about the future. But I met, you know, years later when I met Chris Heath, when I was kind of fairly wet behind my ears starting out, and I remember him saying to me, if you get stuck when you're talking to any musicians, just ask them what they're going to do next. That's what people want to know. People want to know what you're going to do next. And it's astonishing how little happens, because things are written either for, not entirely for fans, quite rightly. People do not write for fans because the fan audience for any band, even the biggest band, is you know, by nature exclusionary. Not everybody will be a fan of this thing here. But just the fascination of somebody announcing a thing that they might do next, that's got value to everyone. And you never know, they may announce something genuinely astonishing. So I found that interesting, the forward, future-facing thing. And because nobody else is going to tell you this. Only the faithful hits would tell you this.
And I guess things are moving at such a pace then as well that if you weren't looking forward, you know, you'd get swept away, wouldn't you? You know, you had to keep moving in that direction very quickly.
Well, that kind of brings us to page 18 and the first of the clothing and merchandise ads, where one of them is a half-page ad for punk gear from Individual Trading of Bedford. And this is really out of date. This is like, you can see that the dial has moved, things have changed, and a sullen drawing of a bunch of bony punks in their kind of bondage kecks and their zip-covered kind of Rosillo's gear and their mohair jackets and their wraparound space laser specs. Even then, I knew this is kind of, things have changed a bit here. They think this is not... These were the kids 2 years older than me at school who were still hanging on to a thing that I knew had gone. And even in the mix here, there's a Madness t-shirt, you know, just like poking its little head up about the future. The Susie Sue stuff is here. She's on the road to becoming what she's going to be, which is, you know, something beyond punk, her own goth person.
Adam and the Ants.
Adam and the Ants are in there, yeah, and they're going to become something quite... This is Adam and the Ants in their, very much in their Marquis de Sade, S&M thing.
Dirt Wears White Socks.
Dirt Wears White Socks. Maybe the readers didn't quite understand that. Interesting. And you can always tell the kind of the T-shirt adverts were... They were like the leaderboard. And the T-shirt adverts from Star Prints of Leicester are The Jam, The Police, Blondie, Sid Vicious, Mods, Susie and the Banshees, Sex Pistols, Clash, UK Subs, Police, Pretenders, and Blondie again. So kind of that's your real elite, and few of them. There's a little bit of punk there, but actually as a new era is happening, you know, The Jam and Blondie, you know, Blondie had kind of been a punk thing, hadn't they? But they were... When they were the biggest band in the world, they'd left punk long behind. And we forget how huge the Police were. When the Police were absolutely massive, weren't they? When you think about them now, and it's bloody Sting and his Blue Turtles, but they were vast. They were an enormous thing. And something we haven't mentioned at all, even though we're discussing Smash Hits, is the girls fancied them. And that was the engine room of Smash Hits. You know, the boys want to be them, the girls want to snog them. Some of the boys want to snog them as well. That would be in the future. You know, that kind of in a world before pop saturated everything, when this was your one keyhole window, and obviously girls drove pop music, girls, were buying the records and buying the posters and so on, and the very, very male weeklies just could not get a handle on that, and smash hits understood it. And would understand it more and more as time went by, and they understood the values of a beautiful colour photograph, and video comes along and accentuates that, and bands become more styled, and heart throbs emerge, all that kind of thing. So that, I always find the adverts as fascinating as the content.
Well, just under the T-shirts, straight ties. I mean, Andrew, I think you could have done that without modifying your school tie. You could have sent off for a £1 straight tie.
That was a day's wage for me, £1.
With whatever you wanted printing on it. Anarchy in 80, Beatles, Beats, Boomtown Rats, Saxon, Bowie. 80 options here from Bent's Leather.
Boney M.
Well, a thin tie is appropriate for Gary Newman and SLF and the Cockney Rejects. A thin tie is appropriate for Iggy Pop and Madness.
It's not appropriate for a Boney M fan. Or Hissing Sid as well gets in there.
God, Hissing Sid. Yeah, so anyway, £1 post-free. There you go. A lot of money in those days, though.
We move on now to a feature on hot chocolate and an interview with your main man, Errol Brown.
With, I have to say, the pretty good headline, Never Mind the Horlicks, Here's Hot Chocolate, rendered in the style of Never Mind the Bollocks. But then slightly let down by the stand first, which is Robin Katz joins the Ovaltinis. Hadn't the Ovaltinis finished in about 1958?
Oh, yeah.
Was the Ovaltini still going in 1980? I only know it because my nan used to sing We Are the Ovaltinis, Little Girls and Boys. Oh, no, my mum used to sing it as well. I thought this is actually quite a heartfelt and interesting and empathic interview with Errol Brown.
Yeah, it's a really good piece.
Yeah, it's all about Errol's troubles and the fact that they maybe aren't the commercial force that they were, but it's very frank. I think last year was one of the real low points in music for me. I was honestly relieved when our attempt at disco music failed. It just wasn't us. We were pressured into it. I mean, I love disco, but it got to the point last year when it was the only sound around. If your record didn't have one disco beat, nobody would play your records. I can't imagine any musician now feeling themselves kind of at liberty to say, we had a terrible time last year, our music was shit, and we didn't want to be making it. It seems like an odd thing. You might occasionally say it, but it would really stand out. There's an absolute lack of media training here. Nobody has been told to keep their mouth shut. Mindless Boogie and Going Through the Motions were not my proudest moment. He said, I like Mindless Boogie personally. I think it's a really good tune, but that's surprising. I think they're also, again, talking about being an integrated band. Having an integrated band wasn't particularly fashionable or common in 1969, recalls Errol. Attitudes were different then. We were the kids of the first generation of black immigrants to Britain. In many ways, we were trying to be the British first. There weren't a lot of us black kids about. We fitted in with the white kids without thinking about it. Nobody ever says that about hot chocolate. They talk about the specials, in the Selected quite rightly, but, hot chocolate. You know why it is, don't you? It's because he was a fan of Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, was he? I don't remember that.
He was a big Tory, yeah. So he was. He appeared on stage with Thatcher at one point, and then was just forever in the NME, just a public enemy. But no, it's a good piece actually. But I've got to say, Robin Katz really buries the lead because the final paragraph is about how hot chocolate songwriters had an experience with UFOs.
This was news to me as well. It was amazing.
It was news to me. They were on their way to blah, blah, blah. Songwriters Steve Glenn, Mike Burns and Dave Most. Steve and Mike spotted a flying saucer in January. Errol says they were on their way to a meeting with Dave when they spotted a flying saucer over the Finchley Road in North London. They followed the light for 90 minutes from Hampstead Heath to St John's Wood. Also witnesses to the event apparently were members of a group called the Toys who were following in a band behind. This would have been. I would have led on that personally. I would have led on the life on other planets. I think the whole thing is quite credible. Errol says, anticipating the cynics. The universe is so vast, it just seems natural that there are other beings out there. And then it finishes, whatever you think of flying saucers, it does seem pretty certain that hot chocolate will be around for a few more years yet. A fantastic non sequitur there. Whatever you think of flying saucers, we can all agree that hot chocolate will be around for a few years. And, to an extent, I don't think anybody gives hot chocolate enough credit.
No, they're a fantastic band, really consistently putting out good songs throughout the 70s. But I'd never, ever realised that this song was about UFOs and alien encounters, and it was actually number 2. It was number 2 in the charts when in the top 40 when this edition of Smash Hits came out. And the video, which I saw for the first time, you find it on the video playlist, Pop Kids, plays on that alien encounter, because I'm like, why have they got a UFO and a hot chocolate video? What's this all about? And then Errol's in like a bacon foil suit.
Ironically, later on the letters page of this issue, somebody is asking, do you think people really listen to the lyrics and pay any attention to them, or do they just listen to the tune? It's about the aliens that are coming to Earth, and nobody noticed until the year 2020, the distant future.
Well, I was only 6 at the time, you know.
There you go. Yeah, you're a lad, yeah. What's interesting, on the next page, an advert for a new magazine, The Face, issue 2, out now. The Jam, Joe Jackson, Graham Parker, The Who, Colour, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, Susie Paul Weller, the photo magazine that's kind to your hands. The ink doesn't come off. And this was what Nick Logan was doing in his spare time, putting The Face together on the art desk in the Smash Hits offices on Carnaby Street, where I subsequently spent a few years doing Select in a strange kind of flat share with Kerrang magazine. What fun we had as we shared our different musical tastes. Oh, so right, hang on. Is this what we're... Right, so we turn the page, and here's... If you stuck around this long to find out about the competition winner excitement, there's an odd little cartoon at the top, which is a kind of hangover.
Strange, isn't it?
Strange Tales from Music Paper, very much in the Freak Brothers style, like a hangover from the independent comics of the mid-70s, quite Hunt Emerson and that kind of book. That needn't detain us. What needs to detain us is the competition winners and results. The Meet Joe Jackson winner is Catherine Sumner of Blundell Sands, Liverpool, not far from me. We must have passed like ships in the night. I have no idea who all these other people are, but I made myself read it. And amongst the runner-up winners, because you could win a Joe Jackson package or something, as we go right down to the bottom, a certain John Hazelwood of Rotherham, Yorkshire, wins a Joe Jackson package. Can this be the John Hazelwood who went on to become one of Q Magazine's senior writers and interviewers? Can this be the John Hazelwood who was part of the core Q team in years to come? Can this be the John Hazelwood who insisted that Celine Dion is a better pop star than Joy Division because she sells more records? Is this the case? Is that John Hazelwood? Listeners, you need to find out. I was absolutely convinced that there would be somebody in here that we knew, and there we go. How many John Hazelwoods can there be? Not that many. So there you go. And if it isn't, anyway, there you go. Congratulations on winning your Joe Jackson package.
There's also a jam competition that's happened. And Andrew, was a story about you writing a letter to Paul Weller around this kind of time?
Oh yeah, this was years later when the Style Council started. By the way, one of the winners of a jam competition is Angela Window of East Ham. Angela Window. You can see right through it. Years later, when the jam split up to everyone's shock and horror, Paul Weller's first Style Council gig was at the Liverpool Empire. And it was like a little gig, like 6 songs or something like that, to everyone's surprise. And I was doing the school magazine at the time, and being naive, I thought, I'm going to go down, I'm going to get the scoop, I'm going to get the Paul Weller interview. And I thought you just turned up and said, hello, I'm from Days High School magazine, will you do an interview? So I went and hung around by the stage door and said, I'd like to interview Paul, can I interview Paul? And the guy, what I now know was the bouncer stroke personal security, said, hold on a minute, I'll go and have a word. And he runs upstairs, and he comes back down and says, Paul can't do the interview now because he's just getting, he's winding down from the gig. But if you write your questions down, he'll answer them. So I wrote them down and passed on this bit of paper and put my address on the top. And 10 days later, Paul Weller's reply turned up in the post, handwritten. And I just put A. Harrison, and it began, Dear A. Sorry, you didn't put your full first name. And he answered all my questions, which were really stupid ones. Like, one of them was, I see you're using drum machines on the Style Council records. Isn't this putting drummers out of work? Should you use machines for proper, socialism? Think about it. Because I think it was some kind of a benefit gig, because all of his gigs are benefit gigs in those days. But he answered all the questions, handwritten, and he wrote them all out. And I've still got the letters somewhere. It's in my mum's place somewhere. And to this day, I've always been very well disposed to Paul. Well, I haven't always liked his music, but I always think that's a good guy, because he's not to know that this kid is going to go on and edit Q Magazine, Select, Mixmag, whatever, and have a role in the world of music. He must have done that for just anybody. He will have been doing that for anybody. And I thought that you're discharging your responsibilities as a pop star very well. So, Paul Weller, good bloke. And I've interviewed him a couple of times subsequently, and I said, you did this, by the way. And he went, oh, yeah, I felt like I ought to do that because, it's the fans, isn't it? So hats off to Paul Weller. So we're into the back matter now. We're into reviews. We're into the singles and the album reviews. And singles reviews by D.M. Pearson, including short shrift for Gary Newman's We Are Glass, 2 thumbs up for Joan Armatrading's Me, Myself, I. She's really mean to Mark Perry. Whole world's down on me on Deptford Fun City. Mark Perry becomes boring old fart, which some say has always been. All right, Deanne, thanks for that.
Yeah, quite quickly, the word count on each review is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
By the time she gets to Electric Light Orchestra, I'm Alive.
Yeah, she's been a bit harsh, yeah.
Near the end. A Blatant Lie product.
Harsh.
Very harsh. There are also reviews of singles by The Regents. See You Later. It's got a great video. Check that one out on the playlist. A bit of a plodder from Elton John. A reissue from Ella Fitzgerald. Sister Sledge. And record of the week goes to Scottish post-punk band Flowers and their single Ballad of Misdemeanor.
Well, facing this, we've got the album reviews, which are artists of more consequence. Again, short shrift for Paul McCartney's McCartney 2, 5 out of 10 from Red Star. Well, you pretty much know what to expect from Paul these days, unfortunately, and this one-man effort is no exception. More home movies in vinyl. If you did that now, you'd be drummed out of the music press, wouldn't you? Yeah. You'd be hanged, drawn and quartered. You'd be burnt at the stake outside the Mojo offices.
I mean, I'd probably agree with it in that it's a very hit and miss album. It does have the absolute banger Temporary Secretary on there. It's got Coming Up on there, a couple of other great tracks, but then it's got stuff that kind of goes off on a very self-indulgent tangent that we probably didn't need to hear. But I see that down at the bottom, the beat, I Just Can't Stop It, gets a very well-deserved 9 out of 10. 9
out of 10 from Ian Jockey Cranner, a man who clearly knew talent when he saw it, particularly when he gave me work on the Smash Hits yearbook. So Ian Jockey Cranner, a prince among men. Great album, a glorious stew of influences and styles here. Reggae rhythms and punk energy, great dance music with strong lyrics, fine melodies and good execution. Absolutely true. It still sounds great. I got a new stereo at Christmas and one of the first things I played on it was I Just Can't Stop It, and I Just Can't Stop It sounded fantastic. And now here's a weird one. So we turn the page, more song lyrics, and it's Request Spot, requested by Noel Hegarty of Kinsale, County Cork. And he's requested the lyrics to This Town Ain't Big Enough by Sparks, which had come out in 1974, then an eternity beforehand. And I think this is a very good choice because actually the lyrics to This Town Ain't Big Enough, this is proper reader service, this is utility. Those lyrics are incomprehensible in the recorded version, partly because of Russell's vibrato high operatic style and partly because they're just so compressed. And it was a long time before I actually even really understood the lyrics myself, although it is of course one of the greatest pieces of music ever written by anyone. So this is proper reader service, helping you understand what the lyrics are. I wouldn't have transcribed this for 10p, I'll tell you. I would have charged a lot more.
An interesting thing about this is, I don't know if you've seen the video for Coming Up by Paul McCartney, but
yes,
he kind of cameos different pop stars, and Ron, he does a Ron, doesn't he?
He does a Ron,
and this was from 6 years before, doing Top of the Pops, and it was that image of Ron was still kind of in the firmament 6 years later,
scorched in everyone's mind,
scary Hitler keyboard man,
Well, John Lennon said that, didn't he?
How many times did he do Top of the Pops, like where he did that kind of still at the keyboard and looking scary and looking down the lens at the little kids?
The Ron face. Well, I don't know. I mean, but that was quite a... that was a way to show that you were not... that pop music at that time was much more in the stranglehold of light entertainment than we tend to remember. It was quite Seaside Special. And you had to show clear demarcation, clear blue water. What better way to do that than to look like a kind of 1920s jazz Hitler? And just glare at the view, just glare down the barrel of the camera at the viewers while your falsetto male girl brother is cavorting in an operatic style that makes Freddie Mercury look like giant haystacks. That was not surprising it made an impression, not surprising that people thought it was fantastic. And Sparks are finally getting their due. But they didn't for years. It was a good 20 years after This Town Ain't Big Enough for both of us. Well, okay, maybe after Beat the Clock and the Giorgio Moroder album, the Number One in Heaven stuff. I would just regard that as this weird thing. And now people understand just what an incredibly, one hates to fall back on the music journalism cliche of influential, but they were influential more, not just in the sense people wanted to sound like them, but people wanted to be disturbing like them. It was more punk than punk.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sparks.
I mean, certainly, in the early 80s when, it was, what was it, 79, when Beat the Clock and all the Giorgio Moroder stuff came out. And I've got a brother and sister quite a bit older than me. And I remember them telling me about Sparks, and they'd seen them on Top of the Pops for This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us. And they both told me how scared they were watching that performance. And, 5, 6 years later, they were still feeling that fear. And it was something that
pop music was quite frightening.
Yeah, it really stuck with you.
I mean, pretty much my earliest memory is David Bowie doing Life on Mars on what must have been the second time, when it was a hit second time around. So that would have been, 1973? So I'd have been 6. And it freaked the shit out of me. And I couldn't, because I didn't really understand the context. So I couldn't tell the difference between Top of the Pops and Doctor Who and the news. It all seemed to be the same thing. And it all seemed to have that same threatening, foreboding, and almost kind of H.P. Lovecraftian, what is going on outside our reality. This is what's going on outside our reality. This man is floating around in surrounded by weird gauzy dancers. And I couldn't figure out whether he was going to get attacked by the sea devils or whether he was going to start reading the weather. It was all seemed to be part of the one. The world was a frightening place, but also an interesting and kind of a fascinating place. And you wanted to, both with Top of the Pops and with Doctor Who, I remember quite vividly as a kid thinking, I've got to make myself watch this. This is a challenge to me. I have to watch it. I have to sort of come to terms with it, because it was frightening. And now here we are. On the back of that terrible decision, look where I am now.
Well, they used to do this funny effect on Top of the Pops. It's kind of like a negative paint effect where, certain elements of the screen would be saturated in a different colour. And that would scare me. That was a proper, hiding behind the settee and peeking out to see when it had finished.
Because it looked like Mott the Hoople had been shot by a Dalek.
That's it.
Would be the reason. Or that was why it was disturbing.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, the thin wall between Pan's people and whatever bunch of extras could be enacting some kind of pagan rite in a future space jungle while John Pertwee and Joe Grant tried to escape from, something or other. They're probably the same actors. I definitely remember you used to see the same costumes recycled. So a costume that 2 weeks previously had been on some space priestess would turn up on Pan's people, and 3 weeks later it would turn up on a space pirate in Blake 7, because the BBC was spending your licence fee money wisely, as it did in those days, not like now. So anyway, back to Smash Hits. So we're turning the page, there's more lyrics. Squeeze, pulling muscles from the shell. Another one which delivers a lot of reader value because they are complex lyrics. I'm interested in the fact that they have kind of replicated the Squeeze logo and typography, which is the early days of what Smash Hits will become very, very good at, which is making the pages feel part of the world of the pop stars, using similar bits of typography. And this, again, would feed forward, weirdly, into Mojo, where Mojo's, a huge part of the reason people love Mojo is that the feature on Iggy Pop will feel like an Iggy Pop artifact, and the feature on Joy Division will feel like a Joy Division artifact, and the feature on the band will feel like the band artifact. It will be a beautiful object, and Smash Hits is kind of groping its way to becoming that beautiful object here. Obviously, without the resources and having to do everything with scalpels and cow gum and reeling out type on hot wax and sticking it down on pasteboard and that kind of thing. But it's getting there, and there's a little spot, the lyrics for Jonah Louie Kitchen at Parties, there's a little spot illustration of a man playing an accordion with musical notes popping out of him. Not for any reason, it's just an odd little kind of grace note that would become weirder and weirder as Smash Hits went on. I mean, my favourite lyrics page of all time in Smash Hits is obviously the Smiths' Shoplifters of the World, where the art editor scans a Tesco bag and it's the background for Shoplifters of the World and gets into terrible trouble because Tesco is very annoyed that they're encouraging shoplifting. But this is Smash Hits becoming a pop art item an artifact in itself, where objects and images and ideas and themes will all be sucked out of the vortex and placed on the giddy carousel, where they become in themselves art objects. And Smash Hits, at its zenith, at the glory of its madness, Smash Hits is a Warholian pop art experience, I believe, and really should be treated with a lot more respect. Anyway, sorry, rambling on here, aren't we? And then there's a very strange page, Independent Bits, which is the world of the underground independent music.
This is very strange.
Well, the strangest thing is I've heard about almost nobody here, literally nobody, until we turn the page. And here's half a page on budding Liverpool group Wahid. Take a good look at the guy in the middle. That's a budding superstar if ever there was one. Pete Wiley, that's him, ... Liverpool's latest excellent export Wahid, whose highly recommended Better Scream is currently number 11 in the singles chart, probably the indie chart. So yeah, it's like the Crucial Three all get to appear in this edition of Smash Hits.
But there's no mention of the Crucial Three anywhere as well, which is strange, because they say it says something about it was Pete's first band or something.
Yeah,
a band before, but Crucial Three doesn't get a mention,
which is contradicted elsewhere in the magazine, where Julian Cope talked about getting kicked out the Bunny Mail or something. So.
Oh, Ian McCulloch. Ian McCulloch gets kicked out of Teardrop Explodes, but they don't mention Crucial 3, do they?
That's it, Teardrop Explodes, yeah.
And poor Ian Curtis. Just a very short, three sentences. It is with sadness that we have to report that Ian Curtis, lead singer with Joy Division, was found dead in his flat the weekend before last. At the time of going to press, the cause of death was unknown, though Ian hadn't been well for some time. Our sympathy goes to his family and friends, as well as the other members of this fine band. And that's it. That's all you get.
Well, yeah, that's kind of that was the space that pop music occupied at the time, and certainly nobody would have had the kind of mental furniture to be able to deal with the suicide of Ian Curtis. It was kind of this sort of stuff didn't happen in pop music, and it would be only 4 or 5 years later that something like that would have produced the full Souvenir issue with 20 pages of looking back. Pictures, reports, all the rest of it. I did one with Kurt Cobain. It was, a mammoth thing, and inevitably sold unimaginable amounts because people really wanted it. But I don't know that what would have happened if Smash Hits had put Ian Curtis R.I.P. on the front of this edition. I know that around the same time, Kerrang were able to put Bon Scott R.I.P. on the front, and the readers would get it and would really love it. But it was almost like this is from outside the reality of Smash Hits. They would not have had the mental furniture to be able to deal with it. Yeah. So yeah, that is a fascinating thing, and so tiny and inconsequential. I actually missed it running through then, as you can tell. I just thought it was. I didn't realise it actually was reporting the death of Ian Curtis.
I was going to say, Andrew, when you're editing a magazine and a big pop star dies like that, what's it like? What emotions kind of go through your head? Are you thinking, oh shit, we've got to pull this together? And how easy is it to kind of get things at a last minute and pull stories together? You pull in a lot of all-nighters, or? Well,
I would say it's been different every time. Kurt Cobain was the big one because you were instantly completely surprised and not remotely surprised because he'd already tried to kill himself in a way that Courtney Love tried to explain away very inexpertly. Everybody knew he was in the state. And that was the one occasion when Danny Kelly, who was editing Q at the time, he and I had to kind of coordinate our efforts to be different from one another. And it was like, well, we're for the fans of Nirvana. The people who read Select love Nirvana, will be absolutely devastated by this. The people who read Q at the time wouldn't have been. Q was very much in its Simply Red phase of that kind of music that's just coming off the Simply Red Dire Straits cusp and starting to become interested in this stuff. So Q's take on it was, I think the cover line was why Kurt Cobain had to die. It was very lurid. It was quite detached, and it was quite quite investigative, shall we say. This is a story, but it wasn't, this is going to hit home to you and devastate you. And ours was quite a soulful picture, a black and white picture of Kurt Cobain, and the cover lines were, I hate myself and I want to die, the life and death of Kurt Cobain, or something like that. So we had to be enormously respectful because the readers were, poleaxed by it. And Q could do something, quite different. But we were very clear that we didn't want to do just a picture of Kurt Cobain with the date of birth and date of death, that steaming cliche that you would see everywhere else, because you had to do more with it and you had to go into it and understand it a bit more. But yeah, I mean, there's always that question of, you've got your human reaction, which is shock and sort of pity that this should happen to someone. Then you've got your work reaction, which is, well, we have to deliver on this because people are expecting it. So what do we do? I regret not putting Adam Yauch on the front of Q magazine when he died, because I was there then, and I think we bottled it. Really, we should have gone, no, this is huge. But that magazine was then in such a kind of a knot and a tangle of, shall we say, competing stakeholders, that it was like, you look at it and you go, so. But I should have gone, no, we're sweeping the cover clean and we're putting them on the front. But different every time.
We come now to the letters page. Just the letters. No response from an editor of any type.
Again, this was the social media of its day, and there's a fierce debate raging about whether the police are sexist. There's another fierce debate raging about who's a plastic mod and who's a real mod. Anita and Tracy from Rugby are saying it doesn't matter what bands look like as long as the music is brilliant. Why does it matter if it's mod or ska? As long as it's good. We like both kinds of music. Jack, Modette and Rude Girl from Stoke says, it really annoys me that there are some people out there claiming to be original mods while leaving us others with the title of plastic mods just because we wear badges that say Special Sauce Selector. And she goes on to make the case that ska was always a part of mod. But my favourite letter is from a Rockette on my way to Mars. And this is what I mentioned before. Claire from South Wales asked where a lot of records would be if people liked the tunes but ignored them because they disliked the lyrics. The answer is obvious, where they should be, gathering dust on record store shelves. Should we all sing the Horst Wessel song simply because it has a catchy tune, even if the lyrics pay tribute to Hitler? Would Claire buy a record in which the music was brilliant, only the lyrics were in praise of nuclear warfare? She raises a good point, does a Rockette on her way to Mars. I mean, I couldn't go so far as to say the Horst Wessel's got a catchy tune, but it's a fair point. The issues of the day. We have yet to meet Black Type. There aren't any replies to the letters. Black Type has not appeared yet. It's still very much the unmediated voice of the people.
Yeah, because in the era of Black Type, it turned into more of like a running commentary, and the letters were almost, a thing within itself and not about the magazine necessarily.
It becomes a wild piece of performance art where the readers and Black Type are trying to outdo one another.
Yeah.
And people are sending in letters from, Nick Kershaw's snood of Berkhamsted and that kind of thing. Dear Sir Blackie of Type.
Whereas this is more like, letters into points of view. It's like, why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why.
Why, oh, why, yeah, stop moaning about it.
Very tribal as well, between the mods and the heavy metalers.
You better not show your face around Edinburgh. One of many mod haters in Edinburgh, that's how they sign themselves, says, sorry, chum, you're in the minority, to slip into your parker, hop onto your scooter and nip round to the nearest phone box where the Mod Appreciation Society are holding their annual meeting. The burning question of mod. Anyway, so that's the letters. Very, very feisty. Lots of fighting about mod.
And also on the letters page, we find an advert for the very first Smash It's t-shirt that you could send off for £2.80, includes postage and packing.
Modelled by some people who very much got the look of Jordan from the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. There's a lot of spiky heads, a dog collar, and they're in the doorway of what appears to be one of the crappy shops on Carnaby Street. When Carnaby Street really was at the dog end of its existence, and I went there once in the 80s. It stunk of piss and was absolutely in the filth. But the walls covered in graffiti, including NF and swastikas. Lovely.
Oops.
Yeah, that's nice, isn't it?
Joseph Better is a wanker, it says here. Ealing Anarchy crew. So I would have thought that in today's, in a few years' time after this picture was taken, they probably would have been a bit more careful about that.
A bit of Tipex on there, I think, yeah.
Pay a bit more attention to this stuff. Smash Hits perhaps wouldn't be in the state we're in now. So the inside back cover is the lyrics to I'm Alive by ELO, doubtless because of their terrible review. It's been hidden on the inside back cover. Although I always thought the inside back cover was good property. It's a great place to be. People sort of read magazines in the back. And the next issue advert, in the next issue of Smash Hits, Matchbox, Orchestral Manoeuvres in colour, not like in black and white like you just read them 20 pages previously, and Human League LPs to be won.
That's it, that's thin gruel, isn't it?
I'd be perfectly happy with OMD in colour and a Human League LP right now. It's a good night in as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the Human League LP in question would have been Travelogue.
Fantastic. And then we turn the page and a port into the future. Literally the future, because replacing Dexys Mighty Runners, Human League poster. Smash hits of the Human League live before the girls. Photograph Jill Furmanovsky. So Phil's singing with the hair. Ian Craig Marsh and Martin Ware are in that kind of computery cage that they've got.
Yeah.
Martin Ware's singing, which I didn't think he did, but evidently he did.
No, did backing vocals, yeah.
There you go. And projected, presumably by Adrian White, are the slides, which you can see the Monkees had... It's a Headquarters. I don't know if it's just called Head anyway.
Headquarters. Yeah, it's one of their albums.
Oh, there you go. And also The Man from U.N.C.L.E. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a portent of the future, of two different futures. We're seeing, obviously, the future where the Human League will stop being a standing joke and become the towering electronic ABBA that they become when poor old Ian Craig Marsh and Martin Ware make the wrong decision. But also, with the Monkees and the Man from U.N.C.L.E. and the kind of the appearance of the slides, we are also seeing the other feature of Saint Etienne, the postmodern feature of pop music, where it's about the things you know about, where you can just drop a little bit of a signifier in there and go, actually, I know who Adrian Poster is. Actually, I know who Eusebio is. Actually, I've seen this film. I've been to this place. And it's strange because people forget that the Human League were really probably the first to do this, weren't they? The idea they had somebody on slides, they had someone on visuals, and unlike the previous kind of dispensation of visuals, which was show an oil lens and shine some lights through it, they would hit you with signifiers. You know, they'd hit you with a bit of an old film, bit of an old TV thing, a city, a location, a face, and these would trigger immediate associations. And that will then become the currency of pop music in years to come. It would also be the art of noise, where sampling and the borrowing of bits of all the bits of music will become triggers in the mind. Pop music will become mnemonic. It will become a set of triggers. So, and I thought that's quite fitting that that's the last thing you see in this. The addition of Smash Hits, which announces the death of Ian Curtis, also announces the future. And of course, the Human League, before they were called the Human League, were called
The Future.
The Future. So there you go. How about that? So if it's this fascinating now, a remove of 40 years, how interesting is this edition of Smash Hits going to be in 1,000 years when you've buried it in a time capsule and future humans dig it out and start to decode it? Which they definitely will.
Because I think it's actually a very interesting time capsule of pop music at that time, because it feels much edgier and much more alternative than we might remember it. And certainly as the 80s go on and the artists that Smash Hits have championed have become those fully fledged bona fide pop stars, it then moves into the mainstream. But at this point, it feels like it's very much almost part of alternative culture.
But that's the story of pop in the 80s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pop in the 80s is how alternative weirdos became the big pop stars. So Martin Fry, Soft Cell, Boy George, Adam Ant, these people were all punks. You know, even Duran Duran in their own way. Anybody, you know, Toyah, we forget how vastly huge Toyah was for a while. And, you know, this is the Dave Rimmer thesis, isn't it? You know, this is how post-punk consumed pop music and ate it alive. You know, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, the entire world of ZTT is from this. It's School of Malcolm McLaren. You've read too many weird books, you've seen too many weird films, was what nourished mainstream pop. And when that ebbed away, because people were either too old or there was no original source material to nourish the next generation, that's kind of when pop starts to settle down and coagulate and become a bit less exciting. You know, the gulf between what pop was like in 1983 and 1984 and what it was like in 1986 and 1987. It's like going off the Atlantic shelf. And we've all seen it on the top of the Pops repeats as the absolute dire, garbagey state of pop music in 1987. And then Jackie Body turns up and they don't know what to do with it. But it sounds amazing. And then S Express turn up and they're not playing their instruments, they're capering about with stupid outfits on, and it's amazing. There was a need for that to happen because the kind of wave of pop music made by people like Phil Oakey and Martin Ware and Martin Fry, all Northerners, by the way.
Yeah.
Sheffield in it. And the Bunnymen and Julian Cope and, you know, all that lot has crashed. And you're left with you're left with less interesting people. You're left with living in a box, you know, who perhaps don't have the hinterland.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You talk about how music changed again in the late 80s when you hear Jack Your Body, S Express, and that's when we think that Smash Hits starts to struggle with its pop stars and who to feature in the mag. The writing in the magazines is absolutely excellent, but they are starting to kind of flounder a little bit on who to put on the covers.
Well, Smash Hits had got addicted to it. It happens to all successful things. It became enormously successful and becomes addicted to the thing that's making it successful and therefore can't wean itself off. So Jason and Kylie, it's kind of the zenith of Smash Hits because they're, some of the music's great. A lot of Kylie's music is great. Jason's music is not really of any worth. But they're great pop stars. They sell a lot of magazines. All the girls want to be her. All the boys want to hang around with her. And, the way that Stock Aitken Waterman reduced pop to a kind of a science of components and yet still managed to find a lot of magic in it. There are amazing Stock Aitken Waterman records. And when you hear them again, I'm quite surprised how a lot of it does have that rawness of kind of like Inner City, and that very first techno album is really abrasive and quite exciting. But Smash Hits have got to a point where it's selling 1 million copies a fortnight. And often, putting people like The Mission on the front. Never mind Jason and Kylie. But it's a brave person who's gonna mess around with the formula. And the way it was told to me over beers around that time was, for years and years and years, marketers and publishers used to say, why are you putting people like The Mission on the front? It should always just be Jason and Kylie or things like Jason and Kylie. And Smash Hits editors would say, no, putting The Mission or Zig Zig Sputnik or Neil from the Young Ones or, it was weird, Robert Smith or Morrissey or Pete Burns, putting these people on the front is what makes it Smash Hits. And that was when I used to read it when I was a student. I would religiously read Q, NME and Smash Hits for the full everything. And numerous, repeated Smash Hits editors refused to listen to that, saying, no, we've got to keep the mix up because the mix is what makes it what it is. And then eventually people started acquiescing a bit. And then before long, you're trying to sell a magazine on the back of Big Fun or Yell or, these kind of third string shit, basically. Stuff that wasn't good. It was, it was objectively poor. And then time moves on and you're kind of stuck with New Kids on the Block who are, have a much more distant relationship with, they're not, boys next door. And it gets a bit of a bounce out of Take That, who are boys next door, but the format has been then frozen in, absolutely stuck in amber. It must be a good looking boy band. So when Kurt Cobain turns up, I don't recall how or if they covered Nirvana, but when this is the hottest, biggest thing for anybody under the age of 20, and by the way, the girls all fancy him, some of the boys fancy him too, which is also an important part of Smash Hits, always has been, you can't get there from here. You can't get to Nirvana from Big Fun.
They've moved too far away.
You've gone on the board. You've moved to a square on the board where you can't get there. And actually, 10 years later, I was finding that when in my sad, very brief involvement with Smash Hits, it's like 2001, and I'm like, we should do the Strokes. They're like, good-looking lads. All the girls fancy them. They're sexy, and the music's great. But when the magazine has been trotting out X Factor garbage for 2 years, and actually because it had been edited by someone who just had no sympathy or interest in pop music, hadn't really done anything other than just treat it as an overpriced poster mag with not really much content to it. You couldn't get there from there. You could not get to the Strokes from, I don't know. Think of it. You can't get from Gareth Gates to the Strokes. You just can't. At its it won't go. So at its height, Smash Hits had been an exciting magazine about pop music for people with a bit of a working brain, right? It excited you at every level. It was sexy. It was funny. It was interesting. It delivered information. It delivered real reader value. You could trust it. One of the most important things about it, by the way, was, and the reason it prospered in the 80s, was unlike the tabloids, which had got addicted to pop as well, Smash Hits didn't run around trying to find out who your favourite pop star was shagging, or whether they were on drugs, or whether they were drunk. Whereas the nauseating things like Bizarre and Jill Pringle and John Blake and Piers Morgan and all these guys, they were just looking for the dirt because it shifted their kinds of papers. But Smash Hits readers didn't want dirt on the pop musicians. They wanted the pop musicians to be brilliant and funny and clever and colourful and happy. Hence the euphemisms, summer cold, bit of a headache, you know.
Rock and roll mouthwash.
Rock and roll mouthwash, been up a bit late. Looking a little studio tan. Meanwhile, in real life, you know, syringes hanging out the arm and gigantic load of coke all over their face. But that would never made it into smash hits, because the fans, the readers love the pop music, and that was how the magazine was able to get access. But in its later years, in its dotage, it had spent too much time just trying to kind of mine the boy band thing, when the boy bands were getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so it meant it couldn't take advantage of the needs. And this happens to all magazines. You know, poor old Select stayed on the Britpop bus too long. And, you know, when you're trying to sell magazines on the basis of putting the bloody seahorses on the front, who nobody cares about, not even the people in the seahorses care about the seahorses. It's just insulting to everybody. But you can't. Who wants to buy that fucking magazine? Who wants to work on that fucking magazine? Do you know what I mean? So it's like the magazines that have been able to extend their lives, or were able to, because we may have actually come to the end of magazines now, sadly, but the ones that had the bottle and the ability to evolve and to change, which the Face always did. My favourite Face was never the early 80s Face. It was never the Beetroot, Spandau Ballet, Steve Dagger Face. It was the late 80s, early 90s rave Face, the Cheryl Garrett Face, when it was Summer of Love, when it was Kylie and Madonna, but it was also baggy and house music and very kind of democratic. It changed. It was able to change and evolve. And Smash Hits kept changing and changing and evolving until it reached a point where it was just too successful to be allowed to change, because there'll always be somebody in a planning meeting who says, we can't do that, it's too dangerous, too much money riding on it. And when that happens, you are on the road to decline, sadly.
Well, I think that's probably a good point to close the page on this issue of Smash Hits. Andrew, thank you so much for that rather in-depth exploration of the mag. I think we covered a lot of ground.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Well, that's good to know. And thanks to you for listening. Come and say hello to us at GiddyPopPod on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And also check out our website, giddypoppod.home.blog, where you'll find the links to the edition of Smash Hits that we've been looking at, along with those Spotify and YouTube playlists for that extra layer of experience. Don't forget you can help support us by buying us a coffee. It's ko-fi.com/giddypoppod, ko-fi.com/giddypoppod. And we hope you can join us next time on the Giddy Carousel of Pop. Bye!
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 And yes, listener, it was that John Hazelwood.